So I want to start this video with a quote from Julian Huxley, which really demonstrates and illustrates one of the major overarching themes of what we're going to be exploring over the next 20 some odd minutes. And this quote from Julian Huxley says, and this is from the preface to Brave New World, and he says, as political and economic freedom diminishes, sexual freedom tends to increase in a compensatory manner. And the dictator or power structure or president or whoever's in control of whatever will do well to encourage that freedom in conjunction with the freedom to daydream under the influence of dope, which is a funny term. So the freedom to daydream under the influence of dope, movies, and radio. And this will help to reconcile his subjects to their servitude. There's also a quote which I used in another video about talking about ruling ancient Rome and how they used bread and circus to keep people really, entertained and distracted. And while they had them in that state, they would, interject their paradigm or their philosophy or, whatever that might be. So this quote really, I think, is so accurate with where we are right now in history. So now let's get into a little bit more of the major point of the video, which is the myth of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And obviously there may not necessarily be anything wrong with these things. And what we're going to do is really explore the underlying psychological processes and see how maybe perhaps buying into this mindset is maybe a step on the process of evolution or rebellion, but perhaps maybe not the final step. So obviously this phrase, like many other phrases, are very cool. They're talismanic kind of catchphrase slogans that a lot of people can really jump on board with, but don't necessarily really lead to any real or lasting transformation. And it's kind of like just replacing one simulacra or one surrogate for another. It's not necessarily a real change or evolution, but maybe just the illusion of such or the external representation of such. But obviously, first off, we have to say, that it's a necessary part of the process. We all have been there. We probably all are still there to some degree or another, since we're all human and we're all growing and we're all kind of our own path. So we have to say, really, cheers, kudos, gold star, first place trophy, for even, coming to the place in our lives of seeing a lie as a lie, in whatever domain that might manifest, and realizing that maybe we don't really want to be a part of it. We see the destruction, we see the tyranny, we see the oppression, and we might say, you know what, no, fuck that. It's too oppressive, it's too much, of this immature sort of masculine energy that's showing up in our world, trying to control and dominate everything, so no. Just say no to that. And obviously that's part of the process. But some people, that's it. They just get stuck, and that's really the end of it. Or perhaps we get stuck in thinking rebelling is really the solution. Because perhaps, the rebellion is just the other side of the same coin, and perhaps the rebellion is still reliant upon the original thing. And there's a psychological process which basically is like the identification kind of archetype or process, or really what we mean is sometimes we might rebel against something, we might hate something so much that we actually start to identify with it. And that's a real psychological phenomenon. It's like identifying with the object of your hatred. And so that's not necessarily really liberation, that's not really a transformation, that's just the other side of the coin, which society is all well and good to probably kind of say, oh, that's cool, oh, you were raised a conservative, but now you're going to be a liberal. It's cool, duke it out in this false little zoo of this kind of preconceived dialectic that's pretty much already defined and created. But just jump into that, and that's it. And have fun in the bread and circus. And if you don't like Nike, that's cool. You got a bunch of other brands to buy from, but they're already here. So what about actually looking at why we got into the mess in the first place? What about developing some flexibility, some acuity with psychic sanity, psychic house cleaning, and really cleaning that up? And starting to understand the deep connection between our unconscious and the physical world. And this is a huge topic, a huge other psychological thing, which we won't go into in this video, but let's just say that perhaps these two things are made of the same stuff. And if we really, really take it down and get into, who we really are, that's a different conversation, which we'll leave for another video. So obviously rebellion against tyranny and toxicity is a natural and healthy response. But like anything, it can be taken really too far when it's not grounded and balanced. And what we mean by that is that the walls that we build to keep things out oftentimes end up keeping us in. So people can be intellectual hillbillies or like hippie rednecks, where they wear the t-shirt, they're a member of the club, they have the right slogans and catchphrases and do the right cool stuff that's alternative, but mentally they've replaced chains of iron for chains of gold. And it's still a form of kind of imprisonment or yet another simulacra. So oftentimes these outlets really, they sort of allow us to bypass confronting and accepting our own self-sadism and our own self-hatred. So when society or the alternative world serves up, oh, it's cool, just get a bunch of piercings, get a bunch of tattoos, here's the right drugs to do, here's the right alcohol and cigarettes, and have all the sex you want to do, and do all these crazy things, and here's all the stuff for you to be, just entertain yourself with. Because we're conditioned in a world which leverages our desire for instant gratification and our pleasure principle. So rather than confronting that and looking at why we're so addicted and caught up in the first place, we just say, buying stuff and money in the mainstream world, that's a bunch of garbage. But this other thing, it's hitting my pleasure centers in a much better way. So I'm just going to go with that. But oftentimes it's still yet another manifestation of kind of necrophilia. Or the real, people think, oh, that means you're like having sex with corpses. It's not really what it means if you take it back to the etymology and understanding it, that there's biophilia, meaning the love of life, and necrophilia, meaning kind of the love of death and destruction. Which, I don't know, do about 5 minutes of research and look at media, look at culture, look at popular people that are worshipped in our world, and then start to see, is this whole thing a bit loving death and destruction and self-sadism and self-hatred, or is it kind of biophilic? And what I mean by like biophilia or like self-love, I don't mean this like the ridiculous notion that we've been sold in the kind of the New Agey world, because that's not necessarily what it is. It's something much different than that. So oftentimes these outlets, however attractive and cool they might be, and how much they might appeal to us and placate us and pacify us temporarily, oftentimes it can just be yet another way of joining a different group and replacing an old set of programming with just another upgraded version of pretty much the same set. But hey, it's cooler, or it's newer, or it's more rebellious, or it's more conscious, or it's more awake, or it's more spiritual, or it's more fill in the blank. So then our pleasure principle is like, got what I need, I got my blanket, I feel much better, this is cool, this is finally it. And then our critical thought, our rational ability, our sense of self, our sovereignty, all these other deeper aspects just sort of go, just kind of want to go back to sleep, because it's like, that's sort of our weird human tendency, is we just kind of want to shut down and relax and get back to pleasure all the time. Which, obviously, pleasure is an amazing thing. But is it the only point of life? It's a philosophical quandary for each of us to ponder, I guess. But then we could look at, say, Buddhism, for example, and many of Eastern teachings that come out of that. And the major teaching in Buddhism is that life is suffering. Most people take that to be, oh, it's so grim and it's so, life sucks. But really, perhaps it's possible that that doctrine or that idea was really only put forward to correct our natural tendency, which is to think that it should be just all pleasure all the time. It's a very common teaching technique to correct one extreme with the other so that hopefully we can arrive back at the middle. The problem is people take shit literally. They think literally that's what it meant. Don't understand that it's however many years old and it's been filtered through so many people and translated and mistranslated and retranslated and reinterpreted that it's not necessarily always containing the real essence and truth of what it used to have. So what about coming to terms with and integrating the repressed and denied aspects of ourself? Because if we're internally sadistic, we're abusing ourselves all the time, hating all these parts of ourselves and abusing ourselves, joining a different group might not necessarily be the real solution. It might be the symbolic representation of the solution or a surrogate or some way for us to bypass dealing with it, but it might not really be the real thing that we're looking after. And unless we're actually starting to look at our distorted relationships with masculine and feminine archetypes, or in psychological speak, the animus and the anima, which are terms coined by Carl Jung to represent these kind of masculine and feminine archetypes, and even just arriving at the idea and the awareness that these are real things that are inside each and every one of us, and they have really powerful psychological driving techniques. If you think that's untrue, you think that all this psychological stuff is garbage, I don't know, you might want to study the way marketing and propaganda is working and has worked for the last 70 years. Look at the works of Edward Bernays and tons of other psychologists down through the line, and see that actually it's longer than the time that I just gave, but I'm talking specifically in modern times. These archetypes, these are very powerful things which our mind strongly is influenced by, so it's something to perhaps consider. And oftentimes this rebellion is against the repression of an immature and abusive masculine presence, which if we look at the state of the world for how many thousands of years that the feminine has been destroyed by this really imbalanced, patriarchal, oppressive, anal retentive, super left brain, dominant, insecure male archetype. I don't mean male in a gender sense, but a masculine, deep archetype. Then it's really not necessarily that surprising that we would think the alternative is to become lulled and seduced to sleep by an immature and usually passive-aggressive feminine sort of archetype. And what I mean by that is like hedonism of all shapes and sizes, and drugs and sex and all the permutations of those things, saying like, oh, it's cool over here, you were so, oppressed, but come over here, we're really permissive. Before you had to do monogamy, but now you can do, polyamory. Before all these drugs were bad, but now you can do them as much as you want. Oh, before you were taught X, Y, and Z about your body, but come over here and get all the piercings you want, all the tattoos you want, wear all the clothes you want, dye your hair any which color, buy all the right t-shirts, listen to the right music, read the right people, and that will grant you enough social whatever to get you in the right group. People think you're cool, but it doesn't mean that there's necessarily a depth of reflection, meaning in psychological terms we're still kind of in the periphery, we're still caught up in the persona, not even necessarily understanding that we have a deeper self. And even though we've been taught our whole lives to don't look at the deep self, don't go there, maybe that's the real form of rebellion, because all the little placards and all the little games that we get really so caught up in and identified with might just be appealing more to our ego, which is a defense mechanism, which is really usually a ball of pain and tension, and a set of defined and constrictive programming, which is whatever. But that's kind of a different video to get into all the intricacies of the ego. But getting back to the point, if we think about sort of the sirens in ancient sort of mythology, plays this song, it's just very seductive and it just pulls us in. And if we look at the relationship a lot of people get with, say, marijuana and many other plants, it just sort of just really seductive and it just pulls us in and then gets us. And then we end up becoming servants of the plant. which if that sounds weird, check out the book in the documentary called Botany of Desire by Michael Pollan, and he shows this really powerful dynamic that exists between plants and humans. Now again, I'm not putting down any plant because they're here, they have uses and purposes, but like anything, they can be misused, they can be abused, and depending on the state of the person using it are the results that we're probably going to manifest. So without waking up to these individual psychological processes, individual meaning in here, in us, in our center, odds are we will probably just keep on creating and recreating and recapitulating the same old dynamic and arriving at yet another dead end. And that dead end could be frustration, could be isolation, it could be addiction, it could be disease, it could be exhaustion, it could be death, it could be really a lot of things. And if you look at the lives of a lot of people who really bought into this kind of lifestyle, it doesn't always end up too well. Movies show this, study of famous people, study of historical people, shows it doesn't always end up too well. Now we might say, well, what does it mean to end up well? Well, it's up for you to decide and define for yourself as to, what makes sense for you. It's not really my place to tell you what you should live and vice versa. So it just really depends on what we define for ourselves and what seems correct. Well, in that then, what is really a potential solution? Perhaps we could start to really get out of the denial and get out of the deeply embedded self-deception that we all have, and starting to be willing to experience the pain and suffering that we've been avoiding for however long and trying to medicate for however long through all these external means. And to begin to really break down the lies that we've chosen to buy into, consciously or unconsciously, so that we may at some point arrive at a place of more inner wholeness, vitality, and sovereignty. And then learning to develop healthy relationships with these archetypes. So obviously there's great value in having amazing, pleasurable, and hedonistic experiences and just experiencing that whole world. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. This isn't a moralistic rant. The point is basically a very common sense one, meaning if you're a musician or any kind of artist, pretty much if you have a degree of structure and order, that allows you to be even more free and expressive and open and really just get lost in whatever you're doing because you know you have that solid foundation. And those things really go together. And what happens is sometimes people don't have that, and then they get lost, and then they forget that they got lost, or they forget that they forgot, and then where are we? Lost in the cul-de-sac for however long until something hits us and we wake up and we're like, whoa, what am I doing? How did I get here? What's going on? And there's a quote from Carl Jung which says that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing and confronting their own soul. So by soul we can mean our innermost self, whatever that is. And what we're saying is to really learning how to create a natural sense of order, structure, and boundaries in our own life, which is contingent upon a lot of things and will manifest in a lot of different ways. So it really comes down to being willing to actually be rebellious and actually have the internal thing that we've been buying into our whole lives. Meaning, it's cool to be about freedom and go buy a Bob Marley shirt, but if we're not willing to be free in our minds, then what are we really doing? And it's honestly only a very small amount of the population that has really ever been willing to basically take the individual act and really confront and be okay with the risk and likelihood of failure. Meaning, saying I'm going to go my own way, I'm going to do what I need to do, or I'm going to tune into my own process in my own life and start getting wise to my own narrative, start getting wise to the symbolism that's showing up in my life, because I'm starting to understand the connection between my unconscious mind and the external physical world, and seeing that as another Carl Jung quote says, that basically until you make the unconscious conscious, it will show up in the external world and you'll call it fate. So what I mean by an individual act is saying, yeah, maybe I will step out of the group, or maybe I'll choose to do this, or I'll choose to do that, or I'll choose to be in my center and realize that this stuff is not really that necessarily that important. I don't have to be so caught up and identified with it, meaning identified with the persona, or identified with living an inauthentic life and validating other people's inauthentic lives. Because I think, at least in personal experience, the more you tune into this stuff on your own level, the more when some people approach you with manipulation or coercion or falsehood or inauthenticity, the more you just aren't, it feels, you see it, you feel it, you recognize it most of the time. Obviously no one's perfect, obviously no one is beyond the human condition, we all have cycles and waves and whatever, but the fact is we cultivate a bit more of an awareness because we start to become aware of our own internal self-deception, how we're deceiving ourselves, how we're repressing ourselves, how we're abusing ourselves and coercing ourselves, treating ourselves like a piece of property or, like a slave, basically. For example, what I mean is, how we have all this guilt about, being sick or doing nothing or taking time off. It's like, oh, I'm not doing anything. I need to be productive. I need to do all these things. And sometimes people oscillate between these two poles. I'm going to work really hard. I'm going to do everything and beat myself up. Oh, I'm exhausted. So now I just have to be catatonic for however long. But oh my God, I feel so guilty for being catatonic and not doing anything, not being productive. I got to go back over here and do all these things. It's the same paradigm as saying, okay, I've been eating like crap. I've been drinking. I've been abusing myself for 2 weeks. Oh, I got to be healthy. I got to do this fast. I got to do this cleanse. I got to go to this yoga class. I got to be healthy for now. Okay, I've been doing this. I feel so weird. Now I got to go over here and do this thing. That sounds like hell. That does not sound very good. But I can tell you, I've been there. I've been there plenty of times, and it sucks. It's not comfortable. I'm sure you've been there. I'm sure you know people that have been there. It's probably likely that each of us will be there again at some point in the future. But the point is pretty much everything we're talking about so far in the video. So without going on any much longer, which I've already gone on way longer than I thought, yeah. So moral of the story is learning to actually take this individual action and say, whatever the consequence, people might alienate me. For example, if you've been a codependent person your whole life and a lot of narcissists and psychic vampires have been feeding on you, if you decide to start having healthy boundaries, shit's going to hit the fan. People aren't going to like it. They're going to call you an asshole. They're going to call you selfish. Say, well, I thought you were going to do these things. I thought you were going to be this for me. I thought you were going to be that for me. I thought you were going to do this. I thought you were going to do that. So you have to be willing to deal with that. And if you start to get a defined sense of self and say, this works for me, this does not work for me. I'm willing to do this, not willing to do that. You have to be strong enough to stand in that when people say, oh, you're an asshole. You think you're so much better than me because you don't want to do this. Or, if you drink, like for example, I don't really drink, I don't have any moral qualms with it. I just don't really like it. Doesn't do much for me. It never really did, and I was never really that attracted to it. But there's been plenty of occasions where, I was hanging out. I don't really do it anymore, but if I would hang out with people and I wouldn't want to drink or smoke cigarettes or, get fucked up, those people are like, ugh, what's wrong with you? You think you're like better than us or something? I mean, like, what's wrong with you? You one of these like crazy like health people? I mean, you just think you're so like pure and holy that you can't just do this stuff with us? And it's like, no, I didn't say that. I just said I didn't feel like it. So you have to be willing to put up with that shit, which that requires to be an individual. Because the fear is people won't love me, people won't respect me, people won't take care of me, how am I going to make money, how am I going to survive? This is a deep tribal mentality that we have of don't break away from the group, because if you do, you're going to die because you're not going to be able to survive on your own. And that is a deeper conversation getting into really how we view reality and the cosmos and our place in it. So it's something to really consider and look at. But this video is already long enough, so hopefully this has been helpful and spurred some thought and conversations. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up, share it, post it around, subscribe to my channel, post a comment below, and thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.